Hello, my dear. How are you doing? Today I'm going to talk about a subject that many people avoid, that causes controversy, that generates discomfort, but that needs to be said with all honesty and care. The reasons why many women and men over 60 and 70 are consciously choosing not to have a romantic partner, and why this decision can be not only valid, but profoundly liberating and healthy for your mental and emotional well-being. I know this might sound strange to many because we were raised with the idea that we need someone by our side to be complete, to be happy, to have value. But today, I want to invite you to look at this issue from a completely different perspective, a perspective that respects your individuality, your history, your hard-won autonomy, and the emotional freedom you built over decades of life. Before I continue, I want to ask you something very important. If this video is resonating with you, if you are identifying with it, or know someone who needs to hear this, please give it a like now, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those friends, those family members who are also in this stage of life and who deserve to hear this message of empowerment and emotional freedom. Because the more people know that there is another way to live, the stronger and freer we all become. And I really want you to comment below. Are you in this stage of life? And how do you feel about having or not having a partner? Share your experience, because your story can inspire many others. Now, tell me one thing, with all sincerity. How many times have you heard someone say, "Oh, poor thing, she's alone at that age," or "Who will take care of him now that he's older?" Or even, "It's not healthy to be alone after 60. These phrases are so deeply rooted in our culture, in our society, that many people end up believing that being without a partner is synonymous with loneliness, failure, existential emptiness. But I'm here today to tell you that this is a great lie, a social construct that does not take into account the complexity of mature adult life, the emotional richness you have achieved, the peace you have finally reached after so many battles, and especially the freedom you have the right to exercise without guilt, without fear, and without judgment. The first reason why many people over 60 and 70 choose not to have a partner is simple and powerful: hard-won freedom. After decades of raising children, building careers, managing a home, caring for aging parents, supporting families, many women and men reach this stage of life. And finally, for the first time in decades, they can make choices based exclusively on what they want, what they desire, what makes sense to them, without having to negotiate, without having to adapt, without having to give up their schedules, their routines, their small daily pleasures. In my office recently, a 68-year-old patient told me something that stuck in my mind. "Doctora, I spent 40 years married. I raised 3 children. I cared for my husband when he was ill. And now that he is gone, people expect me to look for another partner. But do you know what I discovered? I like waking up when I want, drinking my coffee, reading my book in silence, traveling wherever I want without having to ask if the other person wants to come along, decorating my house the way I always wanted, eating what I want when I want. This doesn't make me selfish, it makes me free, and I deserve this freedom after so much time giving myself away." This statement perfectly summarizes what many people in this age group feel but are afraid to express. Because there is enormous social pressure for everyone to be in relationships, as if being alone were some kind of personal failure. But the truth is that loneliness and being alone are two completely different things. And many people discover that being alone is actually a profound way of being whole, of being complete, of being at peace with oneself, a true sign of wholehearted living. The second reason is the emotional exhaustion of starting over. Let's be very honest here. Building a relationship takes work. It requires emotional energy, it requires patience, it requires adaptation, it requires vulnerability. And after a lifetime of building and deconstructing relationships, after marriages that ended, relationships that didn't work out, losses, grief, many people simply don't have the energy or desire to invest in that process again. It is not laziness, it is not resignation, it is not bitterness. It is a conscious choice to preserve one's own emotional energy for things that truly matter at this stage of life: health, well-being, hobbies, friendships, family, personal projects, travel, self-discovery. A 72-year-old patient told me that after being widowed, several friends tried to introduce her to men her age, and she said, "Brené, I don't want to go through the process of getting to know someone else's trauma, learning someone else's ways, dealing with jealousy, insecurities, expectations, families that might not accept me, adult children who might create problems. I've lived through all of that, and now I want peace. I want simplicity. I want to wake up in the morning and not have to explain to anyone what I'm feeling or why I want to stay quiet in my corner. This testimony reveals something very important. The choice not to have a partner is not about rejecting love or human connection. It is about choosing a different way of living love, a way that includes self-love, self-care, and emotional self-preservation as absolute priorities. The third reason, and this one is very important, is the rediscovery of one's own identity. Many people, especially women who married young, spent decades being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's caregiver, and in this process, they lost sight of who they were before all those roles. What were their individual dreams, their talents, their passions, their deepest desires that were buried under layers and layers of responsibilities and social expectations? When they reach 60, 70, and especially when they become widowed or separated, many of these people experience something extraordinary. They begin to reconnect with who they really are, with that girl or boy who dreamed, who had plans, who had a unique spark of life. And this rediscovery is so powerful, so transformative, so precious, that the idea of sharing this phase with another person, of having to negotiate one's own identity within a relationship again, simply makes no sense. It's as if, after years of living for others, they finally have the chance to live for themselves. This is not selfishness. This is self-healing. This is emotional justice with oneself. Think with me. How many women do you know who, after 60, started painting, writing, traveling alone, taking courses, developing hobbies they always wanted but never had time for because they were busy caring for everyone else? This stage of life can be the most creative, the most authentic, the freest a person has ever lived, and preserving that freedom becomes a legitimate and healthy priority. The fourth reason has to do with quality versus quantity in relationships. After decades of life, after going through so many relational experiences, many people develop crystal clear clarity about what truly matters in human relationships. And they often discover that the depth of a few friendships, the connection with children and grandchildren, the community they have built over the years offers much more emotional satisfaction and a sense of belonging than a romantic relationship could offer at this stage of life. There is a very dangerous myth that says that without a romantic partner, you are condemned to loneliness. But the reality is that there are so many forms of deep and meaningful human connection that do not involve romance. Decades-long friendships that are true sisterhoods, community groups where people share common interests, volunteer work that brings purpose and connection to the community, relationships with grandchildren that bring joy and renewal, relationships with siblings and extended family that strengthen at this stage of life. A patient told me something beautiful. Brené, I have a group of friends who meet every week. We laugh, we cry, we travel together, we support each other, and I feel more accompanied, more understood, more loved with these women than I felt in many years of my marriage. Because here there is no pressure, no expectation that I be someone I am not. There is only genuine acceptance and affection. This shows us that the antidote to loneliness is not necessarily a romantic partner, but rather authentic and diversified human connections. And many people in this age group have already built such a rich and strong network of affection that adding a romantic partner is not only unnecessary, but could even compromise the time and energy they dedicate to these other relationships that are already so satisfying. Tell me here in the comments, do you have a network of friendships that emotionally sustains you? How do you cultivate these relationships? Your experience can help others realize that they are not alone on this journey. The fifth reason is very practical and real, although few people talk openly about it: the issue of health and physical energy. Let's be honest, romantic relationships, especially at the beginning, demand physical energy, availability to go out, travel, have an active sex life, participate in social events, and many people in this age group are dealing with health issues, physical limitations, medications that affect libido, and fatigue that is natural to the aging process. And the idea of having to meet a partner's expectations regarding these issues can be much more stressful than pleasurable. In addition, There is a very real fear of having to become a caregiver for another person, because the probability of one of the two becoming ill at this stage of life is very high. And many people who have already cared for aging parents or sick spouses know how emotionally and physically exhausting this is and simply do not want to go through it again. In my office recently, a 75-year-old gentleman told me, "Doctora, I cared for my wife for 5 years while she fought cancer. It was the hardest period of my life, and when she passed, my children started pressuring me to look for another partner, but I can't. I don't have the energy for that anymore. And besides, I'm afraid of getting attached to someone and having to go through it all again, or worse, getting sick and becoming a burden to someone else." This testimony reveals something that society prefers to ignore. Relationships in old age carry emotional and practical risks that need to be considered. And choosing not to take those risks is an absolutely legitimate and rational decision. The sixth reason is related to financial and patrimonial independence. Let's talk about a subject that many people avoid, but that is extremely important: money and assets. After a lifetime of working, building up assets, ensuring your retirement, your house, your savings, many people have a very real and justified fear of sharing this with another person, especially considering that there are many cases of affectionate scams, of people who approach the elderly with ulterior motives, of families who come into conflict over inheritance issues when one of the parents starts a new relationship. In addition, there is the practical issue that managing finances together, especially when both already have their own established financial structures, can be extremely complicated and lead to conflict. A 70-year-old patient told me that after her husband's death, a family friend started showing romantic interest, but she realized that he had debts and was eyeing her house and her retirement, and this made her back away from the idea of having another relationship. She told me, "Brené, I worked my whole life. My husband and I built our assets with a lot of sweat. And now this is going to my children, to my grandchildren. I'm not going to risk losing everything because of someone who may only be interested in what I have." This may sound cynical or suspicious, but the truth is that there are real risks, and protecting what you have built over a lifetime is not stinginess. It is prudence, it is self-care, it is responsibility to yourself and your family. The seventh reason is the liberation from social and family expectations. Throughout life, especially women, we are bombarded with expectations about how we should be, how we should behave, who we should be with. And often, these expectations come from the family itself. Children who think their widowed mother should restart her life, siblings who worry about seeing you alone, well-intentioned friends who try to make introductions, a society that looks with pity at those without a partner at this age. But here is the liberating truth. After 60, 70, many people finally achieve the emotional maturity to say no, to set boundaries, to live according to their own wishes, and no longer according to what others expect of them. There is an incredible strength in looking at your family, your friends, society, and saying with calmness and firmness, "I have chosen to live this way, I am well this way, and I do not need anyone's approval to validate my choices." This is empowerment at its deepest level. This is emotional maturity. This is mental health. A patient reported to me that after 2 years of widowhood, her daughter insisted on introducing her to men, and she finally had a frank conversation and said, "Daughter, I know you are worried about me, but I am well. I am happy. I have my friends, my hobbies, my routine, and I do not want a partner. So, please respect my choice, just as I respected your choices throughout your life." This kind of clear and loving, yet firm positioning is fundamental so that you can live this phase of life on your own terms, without guilt and without external pressure. The eighth reason is the fear of repeating dysfunctional patterns. Many people who reach 60, 70 carry a history of difficult relationships, problematic marriages, dysfunctional dynamics that have repeated throughout life. And after so much suffering, after so much therapeutic work, so much self-discovery, there is a very real and understandable fear that by entering a new relationship, those same patterns may repeat. Neuroscience shows us that our brain tends to seek the familiar, even when the familiar is dysfunctional. So, there is a legitimate concern that you might end up attracting or being attracted to the same type of person who caused you suffering in the past. And at this stage of life, When you have finally achieved peace and emotional stability, the idea of risking all of that simply isn't worth it for many people. It's as if after years of swimming against the current, you finally reached calm waters. And the idea of diving back into turbulent waters, even if there is the possibility that this time it will be different, is simply too terrifying. A patient who went through 2 abusive marriages told me, "Doctora, I know that not all men are the same. I know there's a possibility of finding someone good, but I also know that my choice pattern has been problematic my whole life. I always fell in love with men who needed to be saved, who had problems with alcohol, with anger. And even after so much therapy, I'm afraid that if I open my heart again, I'll end up repeating the same mistake, and I don't have the age or the energy to go through that again. So I prefer to be alone and at peace than risk being accompanied and unhappy." This is a profoundly wise and courageous decision, because it requires brutal honesty with oneself about one's own vulnerabilities and limitations, and choosing peace over risk is a legitimate and healthy form of self-care. The 9th reason is related to the appreciation of time and the awareness of finitude. After 60, 70, there is a much sharper awareness that time is precious, that you no longer have decades ahead, and this causes many people to make much more intentional choices about how they want to invest the time they have left. Entering a relationship means dedicating time, energy, and attention to another person. Time that could be dedicated to personal projects, hobbies, travel, being with grandchildren, doing volunteer work, writing that book you always wanted to write, learning that language you always wanted to learn, or simply being present and conscious in every moment of your life, without the distractions and demands that a relationship inevitably brings. Not that relationships are not valuable, but at this stage of life, many people realize that there are other things that are even more valuable to them. Things that were postponed for decades and that can now finally be prioritized. A 68-year-old patient told me something that deeply marked me. "Doctora, I have a list of places I want to visit before I die, books I want to read, experiences I want to have. And I know that if I enter a relationship now, many of those things will be left behind because I will have to negotiate, adapt, consider the desires and limitations of another person. And I don't want that anymore. I want to live the rest of my life fully and authentically, doing exactly what I want to do. And that is only possible if I am alone." This awareness of finitude, far from being morbid or depressing, can be extremely liberating and motivating because it puts what truly matters into perspective and helps you make choices more aligned with your deepest values. And now we come to the 10th and perhaps most important reason, the discovery that happiness does not depend on having a partner. Throughout our lives, we receive messages from culture, media, family, and religion that true happiness, completeness, and fulfillment can only be achieved through a loving relationship, that you are half an orange looking for your other half, that without a partner, you are incomplete, insufficient, worthy of pity. But after decades of life, after going through relationships, marriages, separations, widowhood, many people make a revolutionary and liberating discovery. You are already whole. You are already complete. Happiness is an inner job that does not depend on any other person. And being alone is not a sentence of unhappiness, but rather an opportunity to develop a deep, loving, and healthy relationship with yourself. This is perhaps the most important lesson life can teach us. And many people only manage to learn this after 60, 70, when they finally free themselves from external expectations and look inward with honesty and acceptance. A 73-year-old patient told me with shining eyes, "Anna, do you know what I discovered? I discovered that I am good company for myself, that I like talking to myself, being in my silence, taking care of myself, making myself happy. And that doesn't make me selfish or closed off to love. It makes me free. It makes me whole. And for the first time in my life, I understand what it means to love yourself. And that love is so great, so sufficient, that I don't need anything else or anyone else to feel complete." This testimony perfectly encapsulates the essence of what I'm trying to convey here. Not having a partner after 60, 70 is not a failure. It is not a tragedy. It is not something that needs to be corrected or solved. It can simply be a conscious choice to live in a way that honors who you are, what you have lived, what you have achieved, and what you still want to live. Now, I want to make it very clear that everything I have said here does not mean that relationships at this stage of life are impossible or necessarily bad. There are indeed people who find wonderful partners after 60, 70, and who build healthy, respectful, and enriching relationships. And that is also beautiful and valid. The central point of our conversation today is that both having and not having a partner are equally valid choices, equally worthy of respect, and that no one should feel pressured to be in a relationship if it doesn't make sense for the current stage of life they are in. The key here is consciousness. It is the active choice. It is the power to decide for yourself what is best for your mental, emotional, and physical health without guilt, without fear, and without caring what others will think or say. Now let's talk about something very important that might be going through your mind. But Anna, am I not using these arguments as an excuse to run away from love, to protect myself from getting hurt again, to avoid vulnerability? This is an extremely valid question, and one that deserves an honest reflection, because there is indeed a difference between making a conscious and empowering choice not to have a partner and isolating yourself out of fear, unresolved trauma, or an inability to trust again. The difference lies in the quality of your emotional life. If you are genuinely happy, at peace, fulfilled, connected with others through friendships and family, if you have purpose, hobbies, interests, if you feel whole and nothing is missing in your life, then your choice not to have a partner is probably healthy and authentic. But if you are isolated, bitter, resentful, if you feel like you would like to be in a relationship but are so afraid that you don't even try, if you spend your days dwelling on past hurts and projecting that suffering onto the future, then perhaps it is time to seek therapeutic help to work through those traumas and fears, because in that case, not having a partner is not a free choice, but rather an emotional prison. Therapy can help you distinguish between these two situations and make choices that are more conscious and aligned with what you truly want and need at this stage of life. Tell me here in the comments, do you identify with any of these reasons I presented? Which one resonated with you the most? Your sincerity can help others feel less alone on this journey. Now I want to share with you some practical tools for those who are at this stage of life and have chosen not to have a partner, because choosing to be alone does not mean resigning yourself to loneliness or boredom. It means creating a life so rich, so full, so interesting that you simply don't miss a romantic relationship. The first tool is to cultivate a diversified and deep network of human connections. Invest time and energy in true friendships. Participate in groups with common interests. Do volunteer work. Connect with your community. Strengthen family ties, because the human being is a social being and needs connection. But this connection does not necessarily have to come from a romantic partner. The second tool is to develop a relationship of self-love and self-care with yourself. This means having a self-care routine that includes healthy eating, appropriate exercise for your age and physical condition, quality sleep, activities that bring pleasure and meaning, and time for hobbies and personal interests. The third tool is to keep your mind active and curious. Learn new things, read, take courses, watch documentaries, travel. Expose yourself to new experiences and perspectives, because an active mind is the best protection against loneliness and cognitive decline. The fourth tool is to have a clear purpose in life. It can be a creative project, volunteer work, mentoring younger people, writing your memoirs to leave a legacy for your grandchildren, taking care of a garden, anything that gives meaning to your days and makes you feel like you are contributing to the world in some way. The fifth tool is to set clear boundaries with family and friends who try to pressure you to have a partner. Be firm but loving in communicating that this is your choice and that you need them to respect that decision, because only you know what is best for your life. The sixth tool is to do therapy or participate in support groups where you can share your experiences, fears, and achievements with people who are going through the same phase of life, because feeling understood and welcomed is fundamental for mental health at any age. And perhaps the most important tool of all, practice gratitude daily. Look at everything you have achieved, everything you have lived, everything you have overcome, and recognize how strong, capable, and deserving of a good life you are, regardless of whether you are in a relationship or not. There is a metaphor that I really like, and that illustrates this phase of life well. Imagine that you spent decades climbing a very steep mountain, carrying a heavy backpack full of responsibilities, expectations, and obligations. And finally, at 60, 70, you reach the top, put the backpack down, and for the first time, you can simply sit down, breathe, and contemplate the view. And you realize that the view is wonderful, that the world is vast and full of possibilities, and that you don't need anyone next to you to appreciate that view. You are complete and whole, exactly as you are. And this moment of contemplation, peace, and fullness is one of the most precious gifts life can give you. This stage of life can be the freest, the most authentic, the most creative you have ever lived, but only if you have the courage to live according to your own rules, to make choices that honor who you are, and to free yourself from the expectations that were imposed on you throughout your life. Now let's talk about an aspect that is often neglected in this discussion: the difference between being alone and feeling lonely, because these are two completely different things. You can be in a relationship and feel profoundly lonely if the connection is not authentic, if there is no mutual understanding, if you have to hide parts of yourself to be accepted. And on the other hand, you can be physically alone and feel connected, accompanied, and fulfilled if you have a rich social life, if you have purpose, and if you have a healthy relationship with yourself. Pathological loneliness, the kind that causes suffering and needs to be treated, has nothing to do with the presence or absence of a partner, but rather with the lack of meaningful human connections, the lack of purpose, and the disconnection from oneself. So, the work we need to do is not necessarily to find a partner, but rather to build a life that is so rich in connections, meaning, and self-care that loneliness simply has no room to exist. In my office recently, a patient shared something very beautiful. She said that after she was widowed, she was very afraid of feeling lonely, but she created a routine so rich that the days simply fly by. She participates in an embroidery group twice a week where she has dear friends. She walks every morning with other women in the neighborhood. She cares for her grandchildren 2 afternoons a week. She does volunteer work at an animal shelter. She is learning Italian online because she always dreamed of visiting Italy. And she told me, "Doctora, I go to sleep tired and happy every night. My life is so full of good things that I simply don't have time to feel lonely. And when the weekend comes and I stay home reading my book, drinking my wine, watching my series, I feel so good, so at peace, that I can't imagine having to share that space with another person." This is a perfect example of someone who transformed being alone into a positive, enriching, and deeply satisfying experience. And this is possible for anyone who is willing to invest energy in building a life that makes sense to them. Now I want to talk about a topic that generates a lot of confusion and suffering: the difference between chosen solitude and pathological social isolation, because there is a fine line between making a healthy choice to live without a partner and isolating yourself in a way that is harmful to mental and physical health. Pathological social isolation happens when you cut all social ties, when you stop going out, communicating, participating in life, when you lock yourself in the house and spend your days without meaningful human interaction. And this is extremely dangerous for health because studies show that chronic social isolation increases the risk of depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, cardiovascular diseases, and even premature death. On the other hand, chosen solitude, the kind we are advocating for here, is completely different. It is when you choose not to have a romantic partner but maintain rich social connections through friendships, family, and community. When you have an active life, clear purposes, hobbies that connect you with other people, when you feel good about yourself and do not depend on external validation to feel valuable. The key to distinguishing between these two situations is to do an honest self-assessment. How many meaningful social interactions do you have per week? Do you have people with whom you can talk about deep subjects, share joys and sorrows, and ask for help if necessary? Do you have regular activities that get you out of the house and put you in contact with other people? Do you feel happy and fulfilled most of the time? Or do you feel empty, sad, without purpose? If your answers indicate isolation, then not having a partner may not be a healthy choice at the moment, but rather a symptom of a larger problem that needs to be addressed with professional help. But if your answers indicate a socially active, emotionally satisfying, and meaningful life, then your choice not to have a partner is absolutely valid and healthy. and you should not let yourself be influenced by external pressures to change it. Let's talk now about something very important that happens, especially with women in this age group: the internalization of ageism and sexism that makes us believe that older women without partners are worthy of pity, while older men without partners are seen as independent and free. There is an enormous double standard in our society that judges single women much more severely than single men. And this causes many women to feel shame, guilt, or inadequacy for being without a partner at this stage of life, when in fact they should feel pride for having achieved autonomy, emotional, and financial independence, and the freedom to make choices based on what they truly want. We urgently need to deconstruct this narrative that a single woman is a failed woman, that a woman without a man is an incomplete woman, because this narrative is extremely sexist, limiting, and detrimental to the mental health of millions of women who are at this stage of life. The truth is that being without a partner can be a demonstration of strength, clarity, self-love, and the courage to live unconventionally, a refusal to settle for mediocre or unsatisfactory relationships just to meet social expectations. A 66-year-old patient told me that when she tells people she doesn't want another relationship, people react with comments like, "Oh, but you're still young. You can still find someone. Don't give up on love," as if she were expressing a defeat, when in fact she was expressing an empowered choice. And she told me, "Anna, it's so frustrating because people simply can't accept that I am genuinely happy alone. They think I'm fooling myself, that I'm afraid, that I'm bitter, when in fact I simply discovered that I don't need a man to be happy. And that should be a reason for celebration, not pity." This testimony is powerful because it reveals how our life choices are constantly questioned and invalidated when they don't fit the expected social script. And part of the work of empowerment at this stage of life is to develop the capacity to stand firm in your choices, even when everyone around you is telling you that you are wrong. Now I want to share something I observe a lot in my clinical practice that can help you better understand your own motivations. There is a fundamental difference between choosing not to have a partner because you are okay with yourself and choosing not to have a partner because you are afraid of getting hurt again. Both are valid reasons, but they come from different emotional places and may require different internal work. If your choice comes from a place of fullness, self-knowledge, and clarity about what you want for your life, then you are probably in a very healthy place and can proceed confidently with that choice. But if your choice comes primarily from fear, unprocessed trauma, or an inability to trust again, then it may be interesting to do therapeutic work to process those wounds, not necessarily so that you change a partner, but so that you have inner peace, so that you don't carry resentment, bitterness, or pain that can contaminate other areas of your life. The goal of therapy in this case is not to convince you to have a relationship, but rather to help you make choices that are truly free, not conditioned by fear or trauma. A patient told me something very wise. "Doctora, I spent 2 years doing therapy, working through my traumas from past relationships, and at the end of that process, I realized that I genuinely don't want a partner. But now that choice comes from a place of peace and not from a place of fear. And that makes all the difference, because before I avoided relationships out of fear, now I simply don't choose them because I have other priorities." And this change in internal motivation brought me a lightness that I didn't have before. This is deep and valuable internal work, regardless of the final outcome in terms of having or not having a partner. Let me ask you an important question. Have you ever stopped to think about how many incredible things you can do when you are not in a relationship that demand time, energy, and freedom? You can travel wherever you want, whenever you want, however you want, without having to negotiate destinations, dates, or travel styles. You can wake up in the middle of the night and read, watch TV, or have a snack without worrying about bothering someone. You can decorate your house exactly the way you always wanted, with the colors, furniture, and style that make you happy, without having to consider someone else's taste. You can have your own rituals, your own routines, your own schedules for everything, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, from what to eat to what to watch. You can invest your money in the way that makes the most sense to you, without having to justify or negotiate every expense. You can spend as much time as you want with your friends, children, and grandchildren, without having to balance those relationships with the demands of a partner. You can dedicate as many hours as you want to your hobbies, personal projects, and volunteer work without feeling guilty for neglecting the relationship. You can have silence when you want silence, company when you want company, and you don't have to explain or justify your needs to anyone. This list could go on indefinitely, but the point is, there is immense value in that freedom, that autonomy, that ability to live life exactly on your own terms, and recognizing and valuing that is not selfishness, it is self-awareness, it is emotional maturity. Now let's address a question that I know is on many people's minds. What about physical intimacy, touch, and physical affection that naturally comes from a romantic relationship? This is a legitimate human need. And it is important to recognize that giving up a partner also means giving up this specific type of intimacy. And that can be difficult for some people, especially if you have always been a very physical person who expressed and received love through touch. But here is something that many people discover. There are other ways to receive and give physical affection that do not involve a romantic relationship. Hugs from friends and family, regular therapeutic massages, caring for pets that offer unconditional physical affection, dancing, doing yoga, or other activities that connect you with your own body, participating in groups where hugs and non-sexual affectionate touches are normalized. Obviously, this does not completely replace the sexual intimacy that exists in a relationship, but for many people in this age group, sexuality is no longer as high a priority as it was in earlier phases of life, whether due to hormonal issues, health, medication, or simply a change in priorities. And that is completely normal and acceptable. A 71-year-old patient told me, "Anna, when I was 30, 40, the idea of going without sex would have been unthinkable. But now, honestly, there are so many other things that give me pleasure and satisfaction that sex is simply no longer an urgent need." And realizing that without guilt, without thinking there's something wrong with me, was very liberating. So, it is important that each person makes an honest assessment of their own needs and priorities, because what works for one person may not work for another, and there is no right or wrong answer. There is only the answer that is true for you. I want to share something now that I see happen frequently, and that concerns me. People who are genuinely happy alone, but who start to doubt themselves because of constant social pressure. The well-intentioned but intrusive comments, the looks of pity, the insistent questions about when they will find someone. And this external pressure can cause you to start questioning a choice that was clear and comfortable for you. It's as if society can't accept that someone can be genuinely well without a partner. And it keeps insisting, poking, questioning, until you start to internalize that doubt and think, am I really okay? Or am I fooling myself? Here is a truth that can liberate you. You do not need to convince anyone that you are well. You do not need to justify your choices. You do not need to prove to society, to your family, to your friends, that your life is satisfactory. The only person who needs to be convinced of this is yourself. And if you look at your life honestly and see that you are at peace, that you have joys, purposes, and meaningful connections, then you are on the right track, regardless of what anyone else thinks or says. Developing this emotional armor against external pressure is one of the most important jobs at this stage of life and requires practice. It requires you to constantly reaffirm yourself, to always return to your center, to your internal truth, to remind yourself why you made this choice and how good it has been for you. Here's a practical tool that can help a lot. Write a letter to yourself, explaining why you chose not to have a partner at this moment in your life. List all the reasons, all the benefits you are experiencing, all the peace and freedom you have gained. And whenever you feel shaken by external comments, doubts, or pressures, reread that letter and reconnect with your truth. Let's talk now about a very delicate but important issue. What to do when you are genuinely well alone, but someone appears in your life and arouses interest, attraction, and the possibility of connection. How to deal with this without betraying your principles, without feeling pressured, but also without unnecessarily closing doors out of fear or rigidity? Here's the key. Your choice not to have a partner does not have to be an immutable and definitive decision for the rest of your life. It can be a choice for this moment, for this phase, and you are completely free to reevaluate that choice if circumstances change, if someone exceptional appears, if you feel it makes sense to explore a possibility. The important thing is that you do not do this out of external pressure, out of fear of missing an opportunity, or thinking that since someone appeared, you have to take advantage of it, but because you genuinely feel that this person and this possibility add something valuable to your life that is already full and satisfying. The difference is subtle but crucial. It's not about filling a void. It's about adding something good to something that is already good. A patient told me that she was doing very well alone for 4 years after being widowed, but she met a gentleman in a photography course she was taking, and little by little they developed a friendship, and then something more. And she said, "Anna, at first I resisted a lot, because I had decided I didn't want another relationship, but then I realized that I was being rigid out of stubbornness, not conviction. And when I allowed things to flow naturally, without pressure, without expectations, I discovered that it was possible to have a companion without losing my independence, without giving up my freedom, because we established from the beginning that each of us has our own house, our own life, our own spaces, and we meet when it makes sense for both, without obligations, without demands. And that has been wonderful, because it adds without suffocating." This is a perfect example of how relationships at this stage of life can be completely different from the relationships we had in earlier phases. They can be lighter, more respectful of individual spaces, more conscious, more mature. And if you find something like that, there is no problem at all in reevaluating your choice to be alone, as long as it is a genuine choice and not a capitulation to external pressures. Emotional flexibility is a sign of mental health, not of weakness or inconsistency. So, allow yourself to change your mind if your life and circumstances change, but always from a place of consciousness and authenticity, never from a place of fear or pressure. Now I want to talk about something that very few people address, but that is extremely relevant: the role of adult children in this whole dynamic, because often it is the children themselves who pressure their widowed or divorced parents the most to restart their lives. And this usually comes from a place of genuine concern. They don't want you to feel lonely. They feel guilty for not being able to be more present. They project their own fears of loneliness onto you. But the result is that this pressure from children can be one of the most difficult to deal with, because it comes from people you love deeply and that you don't want to disappoint. So, it is fundamental that you have open and honest conversations with your adult children, explaining that you understand their concern, that you appreciate the love and care behind that concern, but that you are genuinely well, that you have a full and satisfactory life, that you are not alone, even without a partner, because you have friends, family, activities, and purpose, and that you need them to trust in your ability to know what is best for you. It is also important that you show them, through your actions and your emotional state, that you are truly well, because if you spend all your time complaining, depressed, doing nothing, your children will naturally think that you need a partner to improve. But if you show that you have an active life, that you are happy, that you have projects and joys, they will begin to understand that your choice is legitimate and healthy. A patient told me that she made a very interesting agreement with her daughters. She promised that if at any moment she felt truly lonely and unhappy, she would communicate that to them and consider the possibility of meeting someone. But as long as she was well, they needed to respect her choice without insisting or making comments. And this agreement brought peace to everyone, because the daughters felt included in the conversation and she felt respected in her choices. Setting these clear yet loving boundaries with family is essential so that you can live this phase of life in peace without constantly justifying or defending yourself. Now let's move on to a very important practical aspect that many people don't consider: the issue of organizing daily life when you live alone at this age. There is a huge difference between being alone at 30, when you have health, energy, and decades ahead, and being alone at 70, when issues of health, mobility, and aging begin to appear more significantly. So, if you have chosen to live without a partner, it is fundamental that you organize yourself intelligently and preventively. Have a clear support network of people you can call in case of emergency, who know where you keep your medications, your important documents, and who have a copy of your keys. Consider safety technologies, such as medical alarms, cell phones with emergency buttons, and security cameras that can be remotely monitored by family members. Maintain your health as an absolute priority. Regular medical appointments, up-to-date exams, appropriate physical activity, and healthy eating, because your independence depends directly on your physical health. Organize your finances clearly and leave everything documented in case something happens. Where are your bank accounts, your investments, your important passwords, your documents? Consider making clear succession planning to avoid future problems for your heirs. Keep your house safe and adapted to your age. Grab bars in the bathroom, good lighting, non-slip mats, and furniture organized so that you don't have to climb stairs or strain too much to reach things. These are practical issues that anyone in this age group should consider, whether they are in a relationship or not. But when you are alone, they become even more important because you don't have someone living with you who can immediately help you in case of need. This is not a reason to be afraid or to give up your choice to live alone. It is simply a matter of intelligent planning and responsible prevention. A 74-year-old patient told me that she lives alone but has a routine of calling her sister every day at 9 a.m. And if she doesn't call, her sister knows that something might be wrong and will check on her, and this brings peace to both. In addition, she participates in a WhatsApp group with friends from the building, where they all check in on each other daily. And this network of safety and mutual care makes her feel protected, even living alone. These simple but effective strategies can make all the difference in your quality of life and emotional tranquility. Now I want to address an issue that generates a lot of anxiety for those in this phase: the fear of getting sick and having no one to take care of you, the fear of dying alone, the fear of going through difficulties without having a partner by your side. These fears are absolutely legitimate and understandable, and it would be irresponsible of me to ignore or minimize them. So let's look at them honestly and see what we can do about them. First, it is important to recognize that being in a relationship is not a guarantee that you won't go through difficulty alone, because there is a very high probability that one of the two will get sick or die first. So, the risk of going through difficult times alone exists regardless of whether you have a partner at this stage of life. Second, there are many ways to prepare for possible future difficulties that do not involve having a partner. Building a solid support network with friends and family, contracting a good health plan that includes home care if necessary, considering the possibility of living in retirement communities where there is care infrastructure and conviviality, saving financial resources specifically to hire caregivers if necessary in the future, doing advanced care planning where you document your wishes regarding medical treatments should you become unable to decide. Third, and perhaps most important, it is necessary to make peace with impermanence and the finitude of life, which is something that will happen to all of us, whether we are in a relationship or not. And the more you work on that acceptance, the less afraid you are of the future. One of my patients, who is a practicing Buddhist, told me something very profound. In Buddhism, we learn that attachment is the source of suffering, and that includes attachment to the idea that we need someone to save us, to protect us from all the ills of life. The truth is that each of us is born alone and dies alone in the deep existential sense. And when you accept that, when you make peace with your own vulnerability and finitude, you stop being so afraid and start living more present and free. This wisdom, whether you are a Buddhist or not, carries a deep truth. Much of our fear of being alone is not about being alone in the present, which can be perfectly comfortable, but about being alone in the future, in hypothetical moments of vulnerability. And this fear of the future can steal the peace of the present. So working through those fears, whether through therapy, meditation, spiritual practices, or honest conversations with trusted people, is fundamental so that you can fully live the choice you have made. Tell me here in the comments what your greatest fears are about aging without a partner. Let's talk about it, because sharing our fears helps us realize that we are not alone in those concerns and that there are ways to deal with them. Now I want to talk about something extremely important that can completely transform your life experience: the difference between living alone and living in solidarity, which is a beautiful concept that involves creating mutual support networks with people who are in the same phase of life, where you take care of each other, support each other, share resources, time, and affection without necessarily being in romantic relationships. There are beautiful movements around the world of cohabitation among the elderly, where several people in the same age group share a large house or live in nearby houses and create a support community, where everyone has their independence and privacy. But there is a safety net and companionship. There are groups of friends who establish agreements to talk daily, visit regularly, spend holidays together, creating a kind of chosen family that offers all the emotional and practical support that a romantic relationship would offer, but without the complications, expectations, and demands that come with that type of relationship. I met a group of 6 widowed women who met in a grief group and decided to rent a beach house together to spend a month on vacation. And the experience was so wonderful that they decided to do it every year. And over time, they created such deep bonds that they are now each other's primary support network. They accompany each other to medical appointments, they help each other when one is sick, they travel together, they celebrate birthdays together, and none of them miss a romantic partner because they have something even more valuable, a deep and lasting sisterhood. This type of social arrangement is extremely healthy and can be a wonderful alternative for those who do not want a romantic relationship, but also do not want to live completely isolated. The key here is to be creative, to think outside the box, to not just accept the traditional models of how we should live and relate at this stage of life, but to create new models that make sense for you and the people around you. I will now share some scientific data that can help you better understand this issue. Studies show that the quality of relationships matters much more for health and longevity than simply being or not being in a relationship. That is, being in a bad, conflicted, stressful relationship is worse for your physical and mental health than being alone, while being alone but with a rich and satisfying social network is just as good for health as being in a high-quality relationship. The famous Harvard study of adult development, which followed people for more than 80 years, showed that the happiest and healthiest people were not necessarily those who were in romantic relationships, but those who had quality social relationships, who felt connected with other people, who had purpose in life, and who took good care of themselves. Other studies show that elderly people who maintain an active social life, who have hobbies, who do volunteer work, who learn new things, have much lower rates of depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, and physical illnesses, regardless of whether they have a romantic partner or not. So, science clearly tells us what matters is not having a partner, but rather having meaningful human connections, purpose, self-care, and a life that makes sense to you. This should be extremely liberating, because it means you have control over the factors that truly determine your quality of life. You do not depend on finding the right person to be happy and healthy. You can build that happiness and health through your daily choices, the relationships you cultivate, and the way you take care of yourself. Let me ask you a provocative question. What if the greatest relationship of your life is with yourself? What if these years after 60, 70 are the perfect opportunity to finally develop a deep, loving, respectful, and caring relationship with yourself? Something you may never have had the time or emotional space to do while you were busy taking care of everyone else, building a career, raising children, and maintaining relationships? Think with me. How many hours did you spend in life trying to understand other people, adapt to other people, make other people happy, and solve other people's problems? And how much time did you genuinely dedicate to getting to know yourself, understanding yourself, making yourself happy, and resolving your own internal conflicts? For many people, the answer is unbalanced, and this stage of life can be the chance to rebalance that scale, to finally put yourself at the center of your own life, not selfishly, but healthily and necessarily. The relationship with yourself involves profoundly knowing your tastes, your values, your boundaries, your needs, your dreams, and your wounds, and actively working to become the best version of yourself, not to impress anyone, but simply because you deserve it, because you are worthy of that love and attention. One of my patients created a beautiful ritual. Every Friday night, she prepares a special dinner just for her. She puts on music she loves, lights candles, serves wine in a crystal glass, and treats herself as if she were on a romantic date, because she decided that if she is not going to have a partner to do that for her, she will do it for herself. And she said, "Anna, at first I felt kind of silly doing it, like I was pretending or compensating for something. But with time, I realized that it was a profound act of self-love, of recognizing my own value, of celebrating my own company. And now this is the moment of the week I look forward to the most, because it's when I reconnect with myself, when I honor my presence, when I remind myself that I am sufficient." This kind of practice may seem simple, but it is profoundly transformative, because little by little, you internalize the message that you are worthy of love, care, and celebration, regardless of having someone doing it for you. Now let's talk about something that I realize generates a lot of confusion: the difference between self-love and selfishness. Because many people are afraid that by choosing to live without a partner, by prioritizing their own needs and desires, they are being selfish, cold, or closed off to love, when in fact there is a vast difference between these two things. Selfishness is when you ignore the needs of others, when you hurt people around you in the name of your own interests, when you take advantage of people, when you have no empathy or consideration for anyone but yourself. Self-love, on the other hand, is when you recognize your own value, respect your own needs, set healthy boundaries, make choices that protect your physical and emotional health, and cultivate a positive relationship with yourself. But all of this without ceasing to be empathetic, generous, loving, and present for the people you love. You can have self-love and still be an incredible person to your friends, children, grandchildren, and community. In fact, the more self-love you have, the more you can give to others healthily, because you are not giving from emptiness, you are giving from abundance. So, choosing not to have a partner because you are prioritizing your peace, your freedom, and your mental health is not selfishness. It is self-care, it is wisdom, it is self-love in its best sense. And here is something important. People who have strong self-love are generally more pleasant people to be around, more balanced and more generous, because they are not desperate for external validation. They are not trying to fill emotional voids through others. They are already complete and therefore can relate to others more healthily and authentically. A patient told me, "Doctora, since I learned to truly love myself, my relationships with my children improved greatly because I stopped being needy, I stopped making emotional demands, I stopped expecting them to fill my voids. And ironically, when I stopped needing them so much, they started wanting to be more present in my life because the relationship became lighter and more pleasurable." This is one of the most beautiful paradoxes of psychology. The more you are enough for yourself, the more people want to be close to you. Now let's move to the final stretch of our conversation, and I want to recap the most important points we discussed today, because I know it was a lot of information, and it is important that you leave here with the main ideas very clear in your mind. First, we saw that there are at least 10 valid and healthy reasons not to have a partner after 60-70. The hard-won freedom that you don't want to negotiate, the emotional exhaustion of starting over and having to adapt to another person, the rediscovery of one's own identity that was buried under decades of responsibilities, quality versus quantity in relationships, where deep friendships can be more satisfying than a romantic relationship, the health and physical energy issues that make relationships more challenging at this stage, the financial and patrimonial independence that you want to protect, the liberation from social and family expectations, the legitimate fear of repeating dysfunctional patterns from the past, the appreciation of time and the awareness of finitude that make you want to invest your time very intentionally, and finally, the revolutionary discovery that happiness does not depend on having a partner, but rather on having a healthy relationship with yourself and meaningful human connections. Second, we saw that it is fundamental to distinguish between conscious choice and pathological isolation, between being alone by empowered choice and being alone out of fear or unresolved trauma. And that therapy can help you make that distinction and process pending emotional issues. Third, we discussed the importance of building a life rich in diverse human connections, clear purposes, meaningful hobbies, consistent self-care, and a solid support network, because this is what guarantees quality of life and mental health, much more than having or not having a partner. Fourth, we talked about the need to establish clear boundaries with family and friends who pressure you to have a partner, communicating your choice with firmness but with love, and not allowing external pressures to make you doubt choices that are right for you. Fifth, we addressed important practical issues such as organizing daily life, security, financial and succession planning, and health care, all of this aiming to ensure your independence and quality of life as you age. Sixth, we worked on the legitimate fears about getting sick alone, dying alone, and going through difficulties without company. And we saw that there are practical ways to prepare for these possibilities, and that working on the acceptance of finitude and human vulnerability is fundamental to living with less fear and more presence. And finally, We explored transformative concepts such as solidarity, mutual support community, relationship with oneself, and self-love versus selfishness. All of this to broaden your vision of the multiple possible ways to live well at this stage of life. Now I want to propose a 30-day challenge that can completely transform your experience and help you have more clarity about your choices. For the next 30 days, you will keep a daily journal answering 3 simple questions. 1. Did I feel lonely today, or did I feel good in my own company? 2. What were the moments of meaningful human connection I had today, even if brief? 3. What did I do today that brought me joy, purpose, or satisfaction? At the end of the 30 days, you will reread everything and will have a very clear picture of the quality of your emotional life. You will be able to identify patterns and realize if you are genuinely well or if there are areas that need attention. And from that, you can make adjustments to your routines, your relationships, and your activities to make your life increasingly satisfactory. This simple exercise brings a deep awareness of your own life experience and takes you from the abstraction of theories to the concreteness of your real daily life. Now, before finishing, I want to say something very important. There is no right or wrong answer about having or not having a partner after 60-70. What exists is the right answer for you, considering your history, your values, your needs, your desires, and your current stage of life. And that answer may change over time, and that's okay. The goal of this video was not to convince you not to have a partner, but rather to show you that this is an absolutely legitimate, valid, healthy choice, and one that is worthy of respect, and that you do not need to justify yourself, apologize, or feel less for making that choice. You deserve to live this phase of life in the way that makes the most sense to you, with freedom, peace, and joy. And no one has the right to judge or question your choices, as long as they are not hurting anyone, including yourself. If, after everything we discussed today, you have come to the conclusion that you are genuinely well without a partner and want to continue that way, wonderful. Go ahead with confidence and pride in that courageous choice. If you realize that, in fact, you would like to be in a relationship but have fears that prevent you, seek therapeutic help to work on those issues. If you are in doubt and want to try both possibilities, give yourself time and space to explore without pressure. There is no rush. There is no obligation. There is only you and your precious life that deserves to be lived in the best possible way. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the end of this long but necessary conversation. And now I want to ask you a few important things. First, subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed, because here we talk about mental health, emotional empowerment, and topics that truly matter for your quality of life. Second, give this video a like so that it reaches more people who need to hear this liberating message that you don't need a partner to be happy and complete. Third, share this video with those friends, those family members, those people in your life who are at this stage and who can benefit from this different perspective on relationships and aging. And finally, I really want you to comment below which of these 10 reasons resonated with you the most. Are you living well without a partner, or do you feel like you would like to have someone? How do you deal with social and family pressures regarding this? Your story, your experience, your reflections are valuable and can inspire and help many other people who are going through the same situation. So please share in the comments. Let's create a community of mutual support here, where everyone feels welcomed and respected in their choices. Remember always, you are complete, you are sufficient, you are worthy of love and respect exactly as you are. And the choice to live alone or accompanied is just that, a choice, not a definition of your worth as a person. Take very good care of yourself, value yourself, respect yourself, and live this wonderful phase of life with all the freedom and authenticity you deserve. A huge hug to your heart, and until the next video.